Hello and welcome everyone to another episode of Align, where we help you align with your true self, with others, and your desired outcomes so you can live your best life. Today we have a very special guest, Lesley, who
Hi,
is
everyone.
who is my Aquarius twin. And the topic today is breaking stereotypes and societal standards. And I bring this up and the fact that she's Aquarius for anyone out there who believes in horoscopes, follows it. Um, Aquarius are very eclectic. They like a lot of different things. They're humanitarians. They have a lot of friends. They're not this or that. And when I met Lesley, and every time we keep catching up, we talk about the same kind of topics where we're always put into buckets. You can be either this or that, black or white. And that's just not how humans are and what humans should be. I feel like we are all very 3D, multidimensional. There's a lot more to us than just this or that. And so this is a very dear topic to both of us. And we're excited to have you on board, Lesley.
Thank you. I'm happy to be here.
Awesome. So I think first thing is obviously knowing more about the way you grew up, your childhood, you know, how did stereotypes or, not being what you were supposed to be affect and impact your life?
Yes, in so many ways, especially when I was young. I grew up in St. Louis, Missouri, the Midwest, and St. Louis in general, even back when I was a kid and teenager, including today, I considered very black and white, literally. You have other groups there, Polish, etc., but they're kind of sprinkled. It's not like New York, where you are, or Los Angeles, and even Miami and Chicago, even where I've lived in all those cities as well. So when I grew up in a very, for any family, especially black, like nicer household. I say this not trying to brag, but I grew up in a nearly 5,000 square foot Italianate mansions, what they call it, and the Central West End, which is a very nice area of St. Louis and gated neighborhood, all of that. So the high school I went to was very affluent. It was one of the considered top high schools in St. Louis, and it was mostly white, mostly Jewish, white, but primarily Jewish. And so growing up, going to that school, being which it was a great school in many ways, but it was more sheltered. Um, you have a lot of rich white kids. And so I was maybe considered a rich black kid, but at my school, I was black. So I looked different. Doesn't matter if my family, had money or not. There was just always kind of that, oh, okay, she's different. You in my class, in middle school, high school, we probably had, I can even name all of them, but I won't. But like we probably had like, I won't embarrass anybody, about five, maybe five black kids in my class. And I don't remember how big the class was, but it was over 100 students. So it was just, so we were, very literally like we were the minority, the double minority. So I go from there, and I wasn't one of the cool kids. You had maybe like, remember one kid, his initials are RP, and he was like a black kid, and he was considered the popular black kid. So it's a little different because it's like everyone wanted to be like, I'll say his first name, Ryan. And he was a little more accepted, but if you weren't like a super cool kid and black, you were kind of the outsider. So felt that isolation. I remember in middle school, you were partnered with buddies. And so I, at the time, was like a tomboy. People never believe it when I say now because of how I dress, and I've done different things and pageants and stuff like that. I didn't know how to dress at all. Was a tomboy. I remember when I first got paired up with my buddy in middle school, we were meeting at a mall. She was fine. She wasn't trying to be mean, but I show up in like these overalls. It was probably pretty bad. And we were like a high-end store, and she was just like, really? So there was that factor. And then the racial component was kind of like, you're always different, you don't really fit in. So I encountered that from my middle school, high school. And when and my parents, they wanted us to be like well-rounded, even in terms of culturally. And I joke with my sister, she says, getting in touch with your roots, you know? And so
That's the PC version of it, right?
exactly, the PC version. So one summer, my parents sent my sister and I to, both of us, but myself to it's a great club, Boys and Girls Club in St. Louis, Matthew Sticky's. And although everyone there is great, the administration, I again felt like an outsider. It was primarily pretty much all Black, at least primarily Black, more city, urban, summer camp. And when I went there, I was like, oh, wow, people that look like me. I was like super excited because I never had that. And I'm even then was like my friendly self, more shy, but friendly. And, you know, again, I was an outsider because even though their skin color looked like mine, they considered me different. The number one thing I got was, what, you trying to be white? Why you talk like a white girl? And it was like, I'm not trying to be a white girl, you know? So again, I just felt like an outsider. So that, I mean, those were probably when I was younger in school, the major things that I really had to deal with. And, you know, one more quick thing that popped into my head was in high school, there, you know, I wore my, I think mostly natural hair. And, I remember one time I like tried extensions that made it really straight. So it was different. And so I went to oh, I forgot what you call when you get together in like middle school, high school, and not assembly, but it's like that. Um,
Recess?
some type of hall. Yeah, like I can't,
Hall?
what's that again?
Grand Hall?
Not grand, but basically it's like an assembly where
Town
every
Hall, Town Hall.
yeah, basically we'll go with that.
Town Hall. I give up. It's been a long time.
Yeah, exactly. I know, like I can't remember it, but I went to, let's just say assembly or whatever.
Yeah.
And I remember I came in with my extensions and it it felt good at the time, but then I was like, that's kind of looking back on it because like the popular, you know, white girls in the school were like, oh my God, Lesley, you look so pretty. And in a way it was complimentary, but then looking back, I'm like, wait, I look pretty when I have this
Mm.
straight hair. You know, I didn't look pretty before. And so it's kind of like, even though it wasn't, they weren't trying to, I think, be, in a way, it's, they didn't mean it bad, but it's a type of what some people would consider that could be a microaggression, an unintended one. But
Right.
it's, oh, you look pretty when your hair is straight, when it's more European looking, or, you know, and so I didn't take it bad, but I thought about it later and was like, that's interesting. Like when I dress a certain way or have the type of hair, I already sounded, you know, like everyone I went to school with, but it was kind of like, oh, we can hang out with her a little bit more. So a little bittersweet.
Yeah.
Anyway, like I said, I could talk forever. So that
No,
is,
I love this. I feel like when you talk, I can envision like you living through those chapters of your life.
yes.
I resonate with a lot of what you said, probably all of it, but I think the different, I don't want to add, I don't want to be like, yes, I'll repeat what you said. What I would add to it in a different perspective is growing up, I would say middle school and mostly high school, I just did not like how that I only could be this or that. Right. So if you're smart, you couldn't be like, if you're smart and you're nerdy, you couldn't be like pretty and stylish. Right.
Yes.
If you are cool, you couldn't be kind. If you were, you know, if you were Asian, you know, you couldn't in a way have like very American values. And I didn't like that. And I think I'm sure this resonates with you too, where I don't like being put into buckets. And I was more than just this or that. And I hated it so much. Like, for example, I couldn't be athletic and into music. Right. And so that's why I made it my mission when I went to school and I went to NYU, Stern undergrad. I mean, again, I chose it very intentionally, right? It's a very diverse school. You live in New York. I was going to study abroad and have a very like international experience that I made my mission where I'm going to break all stereotypes and kind of show the world that you can be anything you want and don't ever let people put you into buckets. And
Yeah.
I felt like it was so empowering where my biggest thing was, what was I called? Oh yeah, I think they called me like the nerdy social butterfly. I think that's what it
Yeah.
was. growing up, like if you were nerdy, you weren't social, right? You didn't have friends. And that was so not my DNA. And so going to college, it was like an absolute game changer for me where I'm like, you need to demonstrate that you can be just be yourself and you can be both, right? So I'm sure similar to you, Leslie, you are grateful for those memories because you wouldn't be so secure in who you are today if you didn't have all those questions and all these like microaggressions kind of thrown at you from a very young age.
Yes, 100%.
You'd be a snowflake, as they call it nowadays, right? Very
Yeah,
feeling.
yeah,
Yeah, yeah. Now I'm like, say whatever you want. Like,
yeah.
I'm gonna
I
do me. I'm a good person. It's fine.
love
Uh,
it. Like,
I love that. So let's dig a little bit deeper on the race, because obviously we have two minorities in the house, uh,
uh,
in all ways, right? So the way you dress, right? You being part of the pageant, the way you speak, just the way you present yourself is not your typical, what are they called? It's not street culture. There's another word for it. Urban. You're not
urban.
urban, right?
I
So,
would.
right. And I've never seen you even have a side, like talk to me about that. Like,
Yeah,
how did you, kind of own your style? That's
sure. Yeah, it was just in terms of the actual style, I kind of grew into myself, even with those experiences in middle school, like I told you, where I'm like, oh, wow, I started to actually dress up more towards the end of high school, like, and a little bit in college. So I found myself more, I was always, like I said, believe it or not, a tomboy at heart. And I'm so feminine in most consider me very feminine in my presentation. I love to dress up and I love to, be girly in my appearance, but I guess it always stays with me in my personality, the tomboy part of me. So that was like really cool because I felt like, oh wow, I'm looking nice. I'm putting it, I didn't do it to get more attention, but I'd have people say, oh wow, they'd notice my beauty more when I wasn't just like wearing these big baggy pants and like and stuff like that. But then I got the, oh wow, you're also like so laid back and really nice. I wasn't mean girl because I think kind of that the way I was raised too. And then in addition, being more like tomboyish, I inside felt like I'm a girl, but I'm kind of one of the guys. It wasn't about like being that girly. So that's how I kind of worked into my style when I was in later in high school. There was a girl that she had done pageants when she was like really young. I always got into pageants when I was like 18 was my first pageant. And so from there, I noticed people saying, wow, you should come to this casting call and modeling and things like that. So that was like more of the how I started getting into that style. When you mentioned kind of not fitting that urban type of thing, the way I was raised was, my parents both are extremely educated people. They both went to Washington University. My father he's still he's an attorney and a partner at like a very well esteemed law firm. Shout out to Brian Cave. Well, they're not paying me to do this. I see like the logos like going across, like sponsored by. But no,
in the back, going.
yeah, exactly, exactly. But but yeah, my father, Jerry Hunter, is a very accomplished attorney, and he worked for National Labor Relations for a former president under the administration in DC. And so, my dad had an article written on him, From Rags to Riches, about how he came from poverty, from a boy in Arkansas to like, worked up as a partner, worked for the president, and accumulated all these accolades and a wonderful career. So I was always raised in a household like speak correctly, not like overly strict in an oppressive way, but just like, what are you doing? Dress properly, speak correctly, hold yourself esteemed. What? No, there was the ghetto or the urban or whatever you want to phrase it just wasn't how I was raised. So when I went to the high school with the more like affluent or, preppy, I guess you could say, white kids, it just felt like me. When I first started to be more around like Black people they weren't mean, like the ones that weren't like, you talk white, but they were just like, oh, you're a little different or you do this. it was it was kind of like who she looks like us. She seems cool, but it was interesting because I'm like, wow. I started to, and I joked earlier about getting in touch with the roots, but it was cool because I was like, finally, some certain Black people, like one of my childhood friends, Chi Chi, love her, and like other Black girls, and some boys, but specifically Black girls that I was like, I never had this bonding with, and I wasn't, although Chi Chi was like me, she grew up also in a affluent home, but she was also always from a young age. She was half, her father's Nigerian and her mother, very like in touch with, celebrate Black culture and know this. But so even though she grew up also in an affluent home, she was always really like, hey, I'm African, I'm Black, these are my roots, this is my history. And so she's an Aquarius like us. You would love her, by the way.
Oh, we need to
You
meet
would
her.
love her. I'm going to show this to her. Love you, Chi Chi.
Oh, we'll tag her.
Yes, yes, we'll tag her in it. But she was one of my very close friends, when I was growing up, and it was nice because it was like, okay, I get it. I'm like Lesley, I was growing up like this, but I'm a sister girl too, and we go, and it was like, wow, someone who looks like me and doesn't criticize me, but who accepts me, and then that made me feel comfortable, even though I didn't kind of have that growing up thing of like having to. I never had to like change the way I spoke because this is just how I spoke. Like, I just did. So, some Black folks, even some of my closest friends were like, girl, white people, we need to like change how we talk. I was like, I don't change how I talk, but I know what you're talking about because that's just how I do. So being with certain friends like Chi Chi and some other Black girls who kind of knew that I was just like that naturally, but also that I wasn't against Black people. I wasn't like, oh, I'm better.
Right.
It was like a perfect merge of like, wow, these are my people. I can be around other people that look like me, but these specific group of people aren't, this specific group of people isn't saying like, why are you trying to be this? They accept me. And it also connected me to other Black people because I always wanted that connection. I just felt like I was always shunned away, because of initially how I spoke and stuff.
Right.
So, I just wanted to make sure I like answered on terms of like how I found my style, looks like dress wise, but then also kind of how I was coming from this more like great household. I was raised with values, but more like educate, read books, your education is your future. Parents took me to piano lessons when I was very young, went to plays, supported my education, but then also I was able to say, this longing I have for my Black folks, I found that outlet in some of my friends who accepted me for who I was.
I love that. Yeah. I think similar to you, I was definitely, and there's the former episode I've done on this too. I was definitely bullied when I was in, I think it was grade school. At grade school, everyone's immature. It's all good. Not all good, but like all is forgiven. But that definitely put a damper on my confidence in terms of I wasn't proud to be Asian. And it
Yeah.
made me want to just like rid anything that I could be associated with it, even though like I knew it didn't make any sense. Like they would say, "Oh, we're gonna go home and eat rice," and I'm like, "Yeah, that's what we do with chopsticks." Like I don't like how's that? Fun? I don't get that, right? Or those
Right.
sort of things like, "Oh, is your dad Bruce Lee?" I'm like, I mean, I wouldn't be mad if if a superstar was my father. I'm like, I love my dad, but like, I wouldn't be mad if he was I didn't understand why it was funny or what, but like it would just made me different, right? And I think through that, it definitely made me learn that no matter what people say, you just need to have a core of like, what do you value and what do you believe is true, right? And I've just learned that, like, wow, there are things about the Asian culture that I really do love. And I would never, like, the family unit's very strong. We talked about this, like the hustle, right? Like you just always have to strive to be the best version of yourself. And that's something that I would never want to like remove from myself. But there's also things about the American culture in terms of freedom and not feeling you're always tied down by like family obligations or doing things for your family, right? So it was hard where in a way I felt instead of externally stuck between the two, I was internally stuck between the two, right?
Right.
I think over time, I would say mostly through college was really hit me where when I studied abroad, I lived abroad, I traveled a lot, it became such a blessing that I always could find a way to connect with different cultures, but I was still different. So people felt safe, like, oh, she like kind of looks like me, or she kind of talks like me, but she can teach me something new. Or she has something like magnetic about her because she has like a whole new experience that she can bring and educate us on, right? So
Yeah.
I think that's why I've been so big on like understanding different cultures, getting to know people's backgrounds. I think when we first met, I was like, tell me everything. I was quiet for like 20 minutes. And you're like, are you sure you still want me to talk? I'm like, yeah, keep talking,
I
keep going.
know.
Right. I was like, no, this is great. So I think that's one thing about like race and stereotypes of race where I love it. And I think we talked about this too, where listen, if your stereotypes about me or what you expect of me is here, and I show up like slightly smarter or like slightly less, like whatever negative trait you thought I was going to have, I win.
Yeah.
The bar
Yes.
set the low, right? So that doesn't hurt us. We're not,
No, not at all.
right? We'll take it. Um, no, but you mentioned one really important thing, Lesley, about you were a tomboy, right? But you liked it,
Yeah.
you eventually dressed up. Same thing, I felt it. And people always say this, my closest friends say to me, like, Jess, you're like a dude stuck in a woman's body. And right? I translate
Yeah.
that as we have both, while we have more feminine energy as a whole, we still have a lot of like feminine and masculine energy, right? So let's talk a little bit about gender because
Yeah.
you and I both,
That's
right?
like a perfect segue. You're like, speaking of.
I got you. I got you. I try to master the art of transitions. I'm
Oh,
not perfect, but I'm working on it.
you're doing
Um, but you mentioned how, like, in terms of gender, you and
yeah.
I, very outspoken, can't keep our mouth shut, right?
What?
Especially we think something is wrong. We can't just sit still, right? Not very feminine of us to speak our minds, right? And
Yeah.
you started your own business, right?
Yeah.
Not very feminine. It's very action oriented, right? It's not like you're letting things come to you, you're receiving. So talk to
Right.
me about that. How do you accept and love the fact that you are fully female and you embrace a lot of these quote masculine traits?
Yes, yes. No, I love that. So, and you're totally, like you said, you brought up some good things that I'll elaborate on. And in
Yes.
terms of masculine and feminine energy, 100%, I talk about it with, again, all of my like best friends are like Aquarius. My other Aquarius friend who's an energy healer,
Oh, nice.
literally in California, and Krista, I'm not, they didn't ask me to shout out.
Tiger too.
I know.
Why are you tagging this
I
random?
just have like really cool friends. Well,
It's the age of the Aquarius for the next 20 years.
yes,
So
it
just saying.
is. It's
Just
so
saying.
weird of Aquarius. And so, yes, and so, my friend I was talking about, Krista has even like with me, as with a lot of people have balances, but like specifically be like, yes, you like have both. And you even said like in many of your past lives you were male. And I'm like, I feel the energy. And so, I do. But yeah, regardless of people's beliefs that way, yes, in present life, there, I definitely like have both, like you, and the feminine part that I love both, and I love both because it's me, but I love both. Call me mischievous because it throws people off.
That's
Like,
wonderful.
and
So
because
true.
when I grew into myself in terms of dressing up and pageantry and some modeling when I was younger, that all helped that, embracing my feminine and the beauty. I love that. As I got older, when I was younger, and I shared with you when we first met, when I was younger, I was more shy, believe it or not, and I was more quiet. In fact, stereotypically, I probably would have been called more Asian because in school, I had a teacher that was even in elementary school that was just like, oh, well, Lesley said to my parents, Lesley's doing really well at school. She's so quiet. And it's just like, yeah, Black people can be quiet. We don't- I know it's rare, okay, but it exists.
Wonderful.
And so she didn't mean it bad, but I think it was odd, to her, maybe I wasn't necessarily more quiet than the other, than all of the other kids, but I think it was kind of like, oh, wow, a Black girl and she's quiet. She loved me, but I think it was like, oh, that's different type of
Right.
thing. So I went from there. I was quiet and a tomboy, so it's kind of interesting because I was more feminine in my demeanor of, oh, quiet, but I dressed, not necessarily look physically, but I dressed more like boyish when I was young. Total transition through like high school and college in terms of, and definitely now, I'm in my 30s, now in my 30s. Y'all can still think I'm in my 20s if you want. But so with that said, yeah, it went from the transition of like quiet and tomboyish to growing into myself in terms of what I wear and dresses and dressing up and feminine. And like some makeup, I never wore a lot of makeup, but doing more with makeup than I had before. But as I became more feminine, especially in my like mid to later 20s up to now, I also became more firm and very friendly and kind, but like you were even saying when we got together last, which is true, that I'm very nice and friendly. But then if it's like, but then there's a boundary that's like, if you cross it, I'm not so nice. Not in an attack mode, but I'm not that way. But I definitely will, be firm and be like, nope, I don't accept that. That's not cool, and very direct, So even though I'm nice and I believe in people are attracted to kindness, and I'm definitely like you, a person that's like put out good energy. I'm all about that. At the same time, I'm all about like standing up for yourself, standing your ground, stating your opinion. And like you said, if there's something that I don't agree with, I try not to ever like be an aggressor type, like unwarranted, aggression or anything. But if someone challenges me, I will take a challenge on, especially if I'll be eloquent about it. I'm not going to, I don't perceive myself as being overly aggressive, but I am going to be firm and outspoken. So it was interesting because the more I dressed up, in addition to, people perceiving me to be attractive and all of that, I'm not saying I'm not, but I'm not, I don't want to say I'm so hot,
You
but
must be bland if he doesn't. Or she doesn't.
exactly, like being considered attractive by enough people, and being dressing up, it was like, oh wow, she's nice, she's friendly, she smiles big, she's dressed up. So oftentimes it's like, oh my gosh, she's like cute, and I am, but I was shocked. People I think were shocked when it's like, wow, she's pretty and sweet. Oh my God, she says when she doesn't like something, and she will tell a person, even a guy, well, especially a guy, actually. It's like, nope, I don't accept that. That's not cool. Don't say that. Out of line. Or they're like, wow, not only is she outspoken, but she has a brain.
Yeah.
She knows how to speak. She knows how to speak 3 languages. She plays classical piano. It's like mind blowing. I think a lot of people, more than non, are surprised by it, as I'm sure you've gotten it a lot. I think most people that I'm at least around, like, they find it attractive, but I think some people, it's so unknown to them. I had a woman on a cruise that Vince, my husband, and I were on, and the woman, she was shocked by multiple factors, of course. but
Lesley, I could only imagine what.
she was shocked by it all. But one of the things that she said to me after speaking with me for a few minutes and kind of sizing me up, being like, is this just some pretty woman that's with like a guy that can, give her this or give her nice things? And she probably didn't figure I had substance going on based on not knowing me just on first glance and stereotypes. And then when she started to talk to me, she, was like, you play classical piano and stuff like that. And she actually asked the question, which I don't get offended by much, but it kind of internally, like, I have to admit, hurt my feelings. I hate to admit, because I'm not normally like a person that's like that, hurt my feelings. And I'll tell you why, when I say it. She asked the question, do people often, like, are they surprised that you're so smart, but also so good looking? And it's like, when I say I was hurt, it's not like she personally was doing it up front. It hurt me because I'm like, you're a woman. I didn't say this to her, but in these words, but I was thinking, you're a woman, you're fairly attractive. She maybe wasn't gorgeous, but she wasn't unattractive. You're a decent looking lady. I think she probably was decently intellectually smart. But I'm thinking, really, as another woman who seems to have a career and things like that, you're kind of asking it like it's so hard to imagine that other people would be surprised. I don't think she meant harm, but it's like, come on, as women, like, let's not assume that just because someone's really attractive, they couldn't possibly be as smart as a woman that's, let's say, average looking, but an engineer. I don't think she meant harm, but when I say it hurt my feelings, it hurt maybe me that we as a culture, including women, we as a culture and society don't just accept that more, that you don't have to be just a model, and no career you can't be a lawyer or a doctor or a mathematician. Or if you are a math, or if you're a mathematician or a doctor, you can't possibly be extremely good looking or considered even just attractive. So, I think that with everything that you're asking about, how I, kind of embrace those two components, I love it and I thrive off of it. And most of the time I'm like, ha ha ha, like I'm smart and I look good and I'm proud of it. But it does occasionally like sting when, even though this woman wasn't being harmful, it's just like the assumption that's like, wow, it's almost like, cool, I think it's cool, but I'm just so shocked that, a woman, any woman, but in that example myself, could be attractive physically, but also, speak more than one language, or be trained in a musical instrument, or be, have their own business, like you mentioned, and do things that are more like active and not passive.
Mm,
So,
I love
yeah,
that. Yeah, and I feel I don't, in a way, I don't blame humans because especially
yeah,
in the age of like information overload, we just want to find a way to like bucket things,
that's
right?
true.
So
That's true.
I understand what happens. I think you and I both encourage people to be a little bit more open-minded because my biggest thing is just because this is just because someone chooses to make money or make a living in one dimension does not mean they have nothing else going for themselves, right? Like
Correct.
just because you work in finance doesn't mean you don't take care of yourself and you can't,
Correct.
like make sure you're physically attractive.
Good
Just
point.
because
I said, hello.
and just because you are a model doesn't mean you're dumb. And I think the hard, and I will never forget, I always get this too, where I have a lot of friends who are models. I've dated models, I've dated trainers, and people will always be like in my industry or professional industries, whether it be law, consulting, finance, med, they're always like, really, Jess? Just gonna go for like the dumb ones? I'm like, actually, they're more intelligent than half of y'all because you're just trained to be, no offense, you're just trained to
No,
like
no, I
follow
think it's
rules, right?
right.
Like, to be fair, in certain professional industries, you could just be a really good memorizer and
Yeah,
be fine, right?
yeah,
Versus when you think about someone in the creative fields, they have to build their own book, build their own business. You've done both, right? So like you have to like build your own brand. It's not easy. Like to be a successful model or trainer, you can't be dumb. Like you just don't have an option. Maybe
no,
right? Maybe they're more street smart versus like book smart, but doesn't mean they can't be book smart, right? And
yeah,
also why I think I just really want people to take away that stop thinking one type of smart or one type of way of making money is the most domineering way. Let the market decide, right? Let people decide what they're willing to pay, how long they're willing to pay for it, how long will they subscribe for these services. Let the market decide. But that's why I'm so against this. Like you're either this or that, left or right. It's just that's not humans. Humans are multidimensional, and you actually miss out on magical experiences and people if you think like that, right? And like, for
yes.
example, my girlfriends or even guy friends, they'll X out certain industries. So like, oh, they're probably not smart, or like, oh, they're probably not attractive. I'm like, have you spoke to her? Have you
Ah,
looked at her? Have you met him? Have you met her? You know what I mean? So stop stereotyping and start
yeah.
speaking to people through Zoom to be safe because going through a pandemic, obviously.
I don't see.
Or do like do make sure you both have like COVID. Listen, I'm always like, you want to meet me? I want to see that negative COVID test,
Right.
the recent
Yeah,
one. All right.
you understand?
Not
Like
mental up here. You know what I mean? It's not a joke.
yes, yes. It's like get to know somebody, be safe, but get to know somebody. No, I agree. And there was something you said that kind of uh triggered.
Bucket, uh,
Say that.
buckets, not this or that.
Yeah, buckets and oh, I'm sure it'll pop into
If you're
head
a model, you must be dumb. If you're okay, if it comes to you, just stop me.
yes, I will, but continue on. But yes, but all great points you brought up.
I love it. And then I think the last, I guess, biggest area that I want to explore is age and career, right? So I always joke around, but it's true. Black don't crack, Asian don't raise it. So you don't really know how old we are, right? We could be like 75.
I know.
This is hey, you know what I mean? Like those are just one of the benefits of being our DNA, right? So how have you, I've always get heard, I always hear this, or a lot of my peers hear this too, where it's like, you're too young, or you too this, you're too that. And there's so many more people with quote more experience than you, right?
Yes.
How have you kind of got over that hump? What are some thoughts that you have, or how do you kind of encourage yourself to follow this inner vision that you have?
Yes. That's a great question. And I am, I'll share an outlook that I have on it. Maybe from an example that a conversation with a younger guy that I was speaking with, it triggered me when you were saying, age and people putting in boxes. But then also I'll share my experience, which actually I maybe I'm blessed or the minority in this way. I actually have encountered the opposite of people assuming, which is rare. So first, I'll give an example of with age and things like that. I'm one like yourself, just knowing you, that doesn't assume that because someone either is young or looks any type of way, even has a disability, or even you could go outside of the box in many ways,
Right.
that they're not capable of great things.
Yep.
Because I think certain people, probably all of us have something inside of us, but certain people have great capabilities that extend far beyond their age, race, or anything like that. And so with that said, I really am like an open-minded person on, just because someone's older and or a white guy, let's say, just because it's an old white guy doesn't mean that he like must know and he must be the most, well-versed person. And just because someone's a young Asian woman who's very attractive doesn't mean she doesn't like know her stuff and have her contacts and is executive like and all of that. And so because of that, it's interesting. Years ago, I hired a videographer. I had my business, and he was shooting, which I started, in my 20s. And with that said, like the videographer, I was going to say resume makeover, woo woo.
Oh,
You can't say I'm not a shameless, like,
there's the plug. Let's do it.
right? Getting those plugs. But with that said, when I started my business, I hired a videographer to help with some video work, some of that, and some of my piano for fun. An excellent videographer, just incredible guy out of Chicago. And I remember when I was talking with him, because, and just conversationally, not asking to make some type of judgment or assumption. We were just talking casually, and I was like, "Oh yeah, that's cool. And how old are you?" And I noticed this when we were first talking, like about just whatever, like where we were living and other stuff outside of the videography and the project we were doing. He was just like, "Yeah, whatever." And I noticed when I said, "How old are you?" He got really stern, and he was like, "Oh, I just don't tell people my age." And I was, first of all, I was like, "Oh, I'm sorry if I asked something like offensive," he was a young guy. It's not like someone that appeared to be older and that I thought might be inappropriate to ask. But I noticed the sternness, and he had said, and I was like, "I'm sorry if, I didn't mean to offend you." And he was like, "No, it's okay." He's like, "I just never tell my age because one time I told someone my age, and they completely like assumed that I wasn't like a capable videographer. And so they didn't hire me. So now I just told, I could tell he was probably younger than me, probably in his early 20s at the time. But I thought about it because, and he was a white guy. It's not like he was, a person of color. It was just, it wasn't a racial thing with people. It really was just an age thing. But because of his experience, it made me think. And I was like, oh, wow, that's so interesting because with working with him, I'd seen his work. He's a great guy and who was capable. I don't care if he said that he was 12. Okay. I really don't. His work was off the chain and I could tell that he was capable, like, so that's all that mattered to me. But when he said that, I was like, you know what? Oh, yeah, I guess, people do. And I kind of felt from in that moment. It made me think, oh, wow, I wonder if I should, like, even when I'm starting my business, not tell people age. Now, I typically don't, I shared on this thing that I'm in my 30s because 30 is kind of that age. But when I was in with professionalism, depending on who you're talking with or helping, it's not like you're 20 and people make assumptions as much. But it made me really think like, oh, is this something, especially in my 20s? If somebody, I guess people usually don't ask that question, but if they do, like, should I be guarded because I don't want people? And then I said, you know what? I'm just going to be myself. But it made me think when he said that, because I'm like, it's really unfortunate. I will say that it's not that I haven't had discrimination. Most of my like stereotypes have been more on my looks in terms of being attractive and on my race than age, because on the age department, I I'll give example, but I haven't had that as much, which I feel blessed about. At least where somebody's like, I felt the energy or or felt it a lot. Um, Even like having my business starting in my 20s, because I remember in college, I had went to a store. I went to school in a city, Bloomington, Illinois, between St. Louis and Chicago is the city I was in. And I won't give another shout out, but and I was going to the grocery store, and I had like black pantsuit and a white blazer on. I think I might have been going to church or something, like, and I was dressed a little nicer and professional. And I remember there was a lady in the store, and again, at that age, I was like, whatever, 20 or 21. It was before I graduated college. And somehow I got to talking to a lady at the, seafood section. And she was like, oh, nice to meet you. And after talking for a couple of minutes while waiting, she was like, what do you do? And I was like, oh, I'm a student. She's like, a student? I thought you were, she literally was serious. She was like, I thought you were a CEO. And I said, well, thank you.
I'll take that.
Take that. And I've had other people throughout my life that I either didn't know or that knew me, always assume, as I've shared with you, as I've studied before for the LSAT, and I've had people later after college, even though I was interested in going on that route in college, I've had people later on say like, oh, you would make a great lawyer. So I've usually gotten from people, even when I was younger, something about my energy where I've always had from people, you're very professional, or you seem like an old soul, and they know I'm outgoing and friendly, but I get like number one, you're very friendly and you're very professional, very professional. And so I'm not saying that I don't feel the age discrimination thing, because it happens, but I feel that something about myself has exuded to people maybe more often than not that, oh, she's young, but I feel like she's older, or so I haven't had to combat, fortunately, that too much with the age thing. I think it's more so of the, oh, she's a woman and she's pretty, but she has a business, and it's more of that kind of shock factor. So but yeah, when that woman said that though, at like a young age, I have to say, I was like, cool, maybe I will. I mean, it planted the seed. I'm like, I got to get on this stuff. Like, let me get my LLC.
I love it. That's
Law
awesome.
degree. Let's get it rolling.
Yeah. No, I think that's awesome that hasn't been an issue for you. I think a lot of my peers, where if it's in like a looks department, especially as a woman, right? Like your expiration date is like what, 27, 28, if that, right?
Yeah.
If you're in the professional field, your prime is your 40s or 50s, right? Anything below or anything above that, you're either ancient dinosaur, must be removed, or you're too young, you don't know what you're doing, right? I
Yeah.
think my biggest, what I've seen from meeting like you, so many different people from all walks of life globally, it's not so much how many years you have, it's what you do in those years, right? So if you have someone who's super productive, say 23 years old, super productive hustler, smart hustling, right? Not just doing like, routine work. Their 1 year could be a 30-year-old or a 40-year-old VP's 3 years, right? It's
Yes.
just people sometimes I feel in their mid age get comfortable because, like, oh, I got this title, I can sit comfortably. And to be fair, like, some of them like to think I've worked for this title, I've worked so hard to get here to sit. But then I argue if this 23-year-old keeps going at this rate, they're going to outrun you in 2 years, 3 years,
Yep.
right? And
Yep.
so that's the thing about age. And I've noticed that even like people who are older, right? It's how, not necessarily how fast you run, but like what you do with the information and all this data that you get bombarded with every day. I think people who are in their 60s, it's very sad, but I hear a lot of people say to me, oh, my company doesn't value me anymore. Like my family doesn't value me anymore. I feel ancient. I'm like, well, no, if anything, you have the wisdom that like we candidly can't like not the experience, but the years of life, we will never like you've actually lived through cycles that
Yeah.
we've never lived, right? It's a
Yeah.
matter of how do you use that cycle of experience and time to communicate the value that you provide for someone who is the more desirable age group, like
Right.
the 50s, right?
Right.
Because I feel another thing I see a lot is you miss out on a lot of talent, whether it be companies, whether it be if you are an entrepreneur, you actually miss out on opportunities when you have this age bracket. And even romantically, right? Both of you and I have had this experience where like you miss out on people who could be really right for you because you put such strict boundaries on what the age limits can be in terms of
Yeah.
what you will date versus like taking the time to get to know that person to say, actually, you're a pretty good fit for me.
Right. Right. I totally agree. I think that that happens everywhere. And even like, and like you said, romantically, a personal experience dating someone much older, a lot older than me that I probably normally wouldn't have considered. But being open-minded to it. And then also professionally, even though as I mentioned, I didn't encounter too much of feeling that towards me, being a resume writer, and I'm not trying to seem like, but just being a resume writer and encountering clients, as I remember the first time we met, we were asking about dynamics and even female executives versus
Yeah.
this could extend to age groups as well. You're right. You're absolutely right about, you know, older generations may be hearing, oh, my company doesn't value me, because even with being a resume writer, as I'm sure you probably just get the sense of living through life and knowing different people, that the baby boomers and older generations, they lived in the time of, you stay with a company, you work there for 20, 30 years, get your pension and get all of this, and retire and live a happy life. And that's what you do. You stick with the company and you stay there. I see that not all the times in my older clients, but because times have been changing, but I still see it where, wow, someone that's a executive, they've worked at whatever, Morgan Stanley for 15 years, and then they moved. It's still a long period of time. Whereas some of my clients who are younger and extraordinarily smart and gifted, they'll have 2 years here, 3 years there. And it's interesting because talking even to my husband, who's older and has like reviewed resumes to potentially hire or not. It's interesting talking as a younger, resume writer, and to him who's like older and a hiring manager, and everything, where he's like, yeah, if someone has an X amount of experience, when he was at his firm and working there in full capacity, he was like, nope, that's out. And it's interesting, and I get it to a degree, but we had these conversations about how, like, just because someone has had 2 or 3 years here, I get it from like a professional HR view, where it's like, oh no, they're not at a place too long. But from a skills and a value added view and like productivity, that is not necessarily an indicator. There could be people that work at a company for 15, 20, even longer years, and they're not unproductive, but they may not be the person that comes in there and builds up quickly and things like that. So I noticed that in some people, and also what I talk about with my husband too, being from an older generation, but being open-minded and talking about a lot of topics, is he, as you know, is like in finance as well. And one thing that we talked about even some weeks ago was like, just because he, or I'll just talk like I was talking to you, to him, I just said husband, just because you have a certain way of like the old finance and you do it your way. I said, there is a new generation of financiers and like tech, fintech, and all of these, areas that are evolving. And they're things that maybe you don't understand because you weren't raised to do that. But they're coming to the forefront. And I was like, there are younger people that are bringing systems into place and that are becoming highly productive and efficient, And so it was kind of interesting because he was like, yeah, he even admitted, he was like, you're right. It's just maybe because a lot of people in my generation don't understand it,
Yeah.
they can't grasp it. But and I in all fairness, I get, even though being young, I get, because maybe in 20 years they'll be like, an 18-year-old that comes along with all this stuff. And I'm like, that's not how I used to do
Yeah.
it. But so I'm trying to like be empathetic. But I appreciate that he was open-minded to say, you know what? Yeah, just because it's not the way I or other like older Wall Street financial, guys would do it, doesn't mean that like, the young, awesome Asian chick Jessica Lee isn't like, yep, I got my stuff, I got my contacts, and it's a different approach, but it's an approach that works, and maybe even more than the older generations because new things are coming about. So I've seen that a lot in my even just with my clients, seeing kind of the disparity and like differences in age and longevity, but also differences in personality. Like I said, that those that maybe a company for a long time may not necessarily be like the go-getters. In fact, the more entrepreneurials and like productive younger people that are really smart oftentimes know what they need to get from a company and move on, so that they don't in 20 years, 30 years have to say my company doesn't value anymore, because they know what they needed to do to
Yeah.
get in and get out, not trying to wreak havoc, but to build their, to build their career in a way that isn't going to put them in a position to be, at the mercy of of someone else.
Yeah. I agree with you. And I think hearing that, and I love how you and Vince have these like conversations. Like I love it so much because you both represent different parts of, I call it like the economy, right? There's
Yeah.
what I bifurcate the world in two ways. There's old school finance and new school finance. And new school finance is trying to transform new age to old school finance, right? But I think new
Yeah.
age finance can really learn from old school finance, given they live through those cycles, right? So they've seen things that we mechanically can't compete on. We've never seen it. But one thing I think what the old school finance can learn from us is like we're very adaptable, we're so used to change, like we grew up on this. Like, you know how
Yeah.
many freaking updates we get
I know,
every
right,
week,
right here we
right?
have both of our
Every app, like we are just so used to, and like we don't. I think we're like, look, I don't want to like say we're all like this, but we're really good at adapting to change for the ones that are
yeah.
not spoiled. For the hustlers, we're like, we're not so snowflakes. Like if something happens, we'll adapt. Something happens, we'll adapt, right? Because we're so used to change. And if COVID's taught us one thing is there's so many events that you will never predict, and the only resilient businesses are going to be the only way that business can be resilient is to adapt to change, period.
Yeah.
I don't care how well your model worked for 100 years. If it doesn't work in this new model, you're going to be erased, right? So I wish more of our community is like you and Vince, where you talk about it, you share it openly, and just, I think it's this respect factor that we just
Yeah.
need on both sides for us to really kind of navigate this, because old school needs new schools tech skills and
Yeah.
coding skills, right? Like you need us and we need you because you have the experience.
Exactly. I totally agree. And like you hit on the head, I think just whatever the issue, but particularly like you said, between older generations, younger generations, I mean, this could go so many ways. One political, conservative, liberal,
Yep.
whatever the parties. I think if you're going to move forward and be and build something and just be productive, you have to have a fair and open-minded conversation. To me, the beauty of it, I don't want to be around, it's not that I don't want to, but I don't have to be around people that think exactly like me. I mean, that'd be awesome if there were like 50 Leslies at like
You'd be bored. You'd be bored fast. I know you. Imagine 50 of you. Like you'd be like, all right, too much.
Yeah, I was about to say it seems cool, but then I'm like, okay.
I'm just trying to go to bed now. Like,
take it back.
yeah.
Right. But like, in this society, I feel like I don't want to say most people are not because I don't know. But I would say that there are some people that feel like, okay, if this person doesn't agree, no, I can't deal with it. I welcome, I mean, I think you get a sense. We've talked about this being Aquarius and social. You should see my friends. I have anything from like the young, like Bernie Sanders, like whatever people that I'm like, okay, to like, the old school, who supporters, don't want to trigger folks. So I don't want to say name, but I'm talking about people. And anything from like gay friends, so like super Christian, like married and I'm gonna have kids friends young, to like Asian, to Black, white, Latino. I mean, if you like, to like financiers on Wall Street, to like theater and energy healers. I mean, my friends, if you put them all together, they'd be like, what the I know you said I could say anything, but I'm gonna try to keep it clean.
Yeah.
So like with that said, it's like, yeah, I've even had people say, how can you have so many groups of friends? And like, and I mean, they love that I can make friends, but they're like, wow, you have like, and it's just like, because I love people that are different than me, even though I can have friends that are so different from one set to another, or even different from me, is because the common link is that we have common decency and respect for each other, and we hear each other out. Yes, I have gay friends, I have, Republican and Democrat friends. But if it was like a Republican friend that was just like, this is what I feel and blah, blah, blah. No, if it was a gay friend that's like, I don't, blah, 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 I'd be like, you got to go. Like, like, so.
That's the boundary right there, right?
Right,
We've the boundary.
like, so I don't care what you look like. I don't care if you're short, you're tall, you're, black, white, gay, straight, super Christian, super not, super Republican, super not. I mean, I think most extremes aren't great, but even if you're kind of on that, as long as you're willing to have an open conversation and be willing to say, I don't think I agree with that. Tell me why you feel this way, and not just going to attack mode, which for most people, we all have our triggers. Look, I'm not even saying I'm perfect. There have been certain times where my husband's been like, well, da-da-da, and I'll be like, about to pounce. So I'm like, okay, Lesley, back it on up. Don't completely eviscerate him. Let him say what.
We need him alive.
Right. I'm ready, but I'm okay. Right. But because, we have that passion. We have that passion as Aquarius. But obviously it's in there, but I can reel it in enough to be like, you know what? I want to have a decent, even if I'm a little fired at first, it's like, ultimately though, it's not like they're saying I'm going to kill babies and they're all going to go to hell, but for reasonable things, I really want to know, I never thought about like that. Why do you feel this way? Even if I disagree, and even if it gets a little heated, you're still respecting someone, and you're really like discussing. I hear people more, as most do, when they're not coming down my throat. Even if I don't decide that I'm ever going to go that direction, it makes someone ponder to be like, hey, I don't believe in, I'll just say X, whatever X is. Like, I don't believe in X. I really never have. Why do you? And if someone says, well, ABC and this sounds good and da, da, da. And it really is like, and I'm like, you know what? It made me think about it. Even if I don't change my view to that, the fact that they're like, even if they're a little passionate, but they're rational and respectful, it makes you consider something more, and maybe even, not completely change your outlook, but shift in some ways of thinking, which that's happened with Vince and I, where maybe he was in a certain mindset and just like, no, this is the way, and this is how I was raised. And then he's like, oh, wow, as he's an older white guy. So it's like, oh, wow, I never thought about this, having a Black wife, or, oh, I never perceived this before, which I've had with other white guy friends in the past. One of my friends from Chicago, he was just like, oh, yeah, is there a lot of racism? And then he experienced it. with me. Doesn't matter how I sound, I'm still Black. People can see. So we had experiences where we would try to go into a certain place and there'd be like different energy from people that where it's like a nicer, more esteemed place, which I was used to, but you know how people can be. And my friend was like, one time my older white guy friend, because as you know, I play piano and I'm classically trained since age 4, so I know what I'm doing. And there was a manager at a restaurant. My friend was bragging, my friend Matt was bragging and saying to the manager, "Oh, my friend plays piano. She's so talented." And the manager was like, "Oh, go ahead and play." There was another guy there, that was also a piano player. So I think some of it could just be he didn't want another piano player to get attention. But, he did act like I didn't know. He's like, "Oh, only people that know about this piano can play." My friend, who's an older white, like I said, my friend Matt, who first was like, "I don't think there's any racism," but saw some certain things with me, literally told that guy off. He's like, "Oh, you won't let a Black woman play the piano?" I was like, "Dang, Matt." And he was like, "I was speaking to the manager." And I'm like, "Oh, who's going Black now? Okay." And I was just like, I'm just sitting back. I was like,
Drinking your tea, watching the tea.
yes, yes, chip, chip. And he was like mad when we left. He was like, "I will never go back there again. How dare they disrespect the Black world?" I'm like, "Yeah, man."
That's
But I'm
amazing.
glad he did it, because if I had acted like that, unfortunately, I'd be feeding into the stereotype.
Yeah.
So even though I didn't tell him, obviously, to do that, but he did it himself, was like so cool, of course, because here we go from a guy that's like, "I don't know, is there really racism?" But then spending time with just me as a Black woman, not even talking about race a lot, but just spending time and seeing things, being immersed in different people, you can have more of a perspective. Like I have more perspective where I'm with my Asian friends. Like you have a lot of Chinese friends and some Japanese friends and Korean. I mean, I've almost a lot of the Asian friends, so speaking, there are some, even can't say it's like all white people racism. There are some Black people that are like, "Oh, whatever, Asians, white people, this, that." I admit, I don't condone that. When even other Black people say things about Asians or this, I don't condone it, because I'm like, I have white friends that I care about. I have Asian friends that I care about. None of the white people that say that are my close friends, but you hear it where it's like, "Oh, those white folks," but not in a joking way, like in a way like me and you joke. And so I don't condone that, because when you're around people, you start to get to know them more and see their perspective. Maybe there's certain ways people act a certain way because of how their culture phrased them, or how this. You can't just. I don't think it's necessarily the best thing to always say, "Oh, they just act like that because they crazy or they don't know." It's just like, maybe if you understood they came from a culture where there's only one child and you got to be competitive or else you're out. Maybe they act a certain way because they have to act a certain way in their culture. It's not that it's always like maybe perceived as the warmest way, but there's ways to explain certain people's behaviors that can be stemmed culturally. And I'm blessed that I have so many friends from different backgrounds that I don't immediately jump to, "That's just nuts," where I'm like, well, based on their culture, I could kind of see that, even though it may not be the way I would act, I could understand that because I know a little bit about their culture. Or I have a friend that shared with me this experience.
Mhm. No, I love that. I
Yeah.
no, I appreciate it, Lesley. I just want to thank you so much
Yes, yes.
for doing this topic with me, because I think it's, to your point about meeting so many of your Aquarius friends who are you feel at home with. I definitely feel at home with you, because we don't fit buckets, and it's nice to have someone who also is kind of making her own path in her own unique way, and like kind of breaking stereotypes or standards that we're supposed to fit or mold. So I just want to say thank you so much, and I always feel that I learn so much from you when you share these stories. I'm sure everyone today listening has learned so much more about your perspective and can relate to it. So I just want to thank you for your time with us.
Of course. And thank you for everything. I love you, and thank you for, hearing me out. And I'm glad that you take away a lot from it, as I do with our connection. And so I'm just blessed to have you in my life.
I love it. Well, the one last question I always ask
Yeah.
everyone is, I really believe everyone has a unique gift that they can share with humanity and make this community a better place. So, what do you think your unique gift is?
I think my unique gift is inspiring through empathy. And I say it, it sounds general, but I say that because all of my different gifts or talents, um, I've gotten feedback that I touch people or inspire people, and that means the world to me. I play, like I mentioned with my business, which is resume writing. It's not just about resume, like writing the resume and getting paid. It's usually dealing with people that are in career changes, going through times in their life that are difficult or being laid off. And so I've gotten a lot of great feedback from my clients, not just on the technicalities, but I have people say, "Oh my gosh, I hadn't gotten a job in months, and with you, like I found something and I have a sense of self again." And
Mm.
so I feel like in that way it's inspiring to them. But I also, speak with people in general and my clients with empathy. I'm not just like, okay, yeah, yeah, yeah. Even though it's not just about the writing or the career, if they express, like it's been really depressing, I've been doing bouts of depression, it's just natural for me to connect with them. And even if it's like not all about the resume, to like empathize and to show caring and concern. And, it's not, so showing that. And then also even through like piano playing, which I did, in school before I changed my major. But I keep it up to this day. I enjoy it for fun, but I've had so many people that say, wow, like, thank you for this. It really made me feel warm and inspired me. So, I have different abilities, but I feel like with everything I do, I put my heart into it. And, I just continue to try and just kind of naturally, I think, inspire and show empathy and love towards people. So whatever I do in life, it's always going to be from my heart and from kindness and empathy.
Awesome. Thank you, Leslie.
See
See you in a few days.
you soon.